It was one of those days when everything seemed to be going right. Marcus had just finished his shift at the electronics store, and his paycheck was burning a hole in his pocket. He'd been saving up for months, pinching pennies wherever he could, to buy the PlayStation 5 he'd been dreaming about since its release. Gaming was more than just a hobby for Marcus. It was his escape, his passion, and, on some days, the only thing that brought him joy. He knew the consoles were hard to come by, but luck seemed to be on his side when he got a tip that a nearby store had just restocked. Marcus, a 22-year-old college student with a quiet demeanor but a sharp sense of humor, was the kind of person people naturally liked. He walked into the store that evening with a spring in his step, heading straight for the electronics section. There it was, sitting behind the counter like a trophy waiting to be claimed. He couldn't help but grin as the cashier rang him up. It was finally his. As Marcus left the store, the boxed-up PS5 tucked securely under his arm, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He glanced around the parking lot but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just shoppers coming and going, carrying bags of holiday purchases. He shrugged it off, chalking it up to excitement. Little did he know, his excitement was about to be shattered in the most unexpected way. Standing a few cars away was a woman named Susan. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored coat and expensive boots, her hair perfectly styled as if she'd just stepped out of a salon. To anyone passing by, she might have seemed like an ordinary shopper, but her piercing gaze was locked on Marcus and the PlayStation in his hands. She had arrived at the store too late to get one, and the disappointment had left her simmering. Her mind raced as she watched him walk toward his car. Susan wasn't used to hearing no. Life had always bent to her will, whether it was in her upscale suburban neighborhood or at her job, where people went out of their way to please her. She felt entitled to things, and in that moment, she decided that PlayStation should belong to her. After all, why should someone like Marcus, a young black man, casually dressed in jeans and a hoodie, have something she couldn't get? The tension began to build as Marcus unlocked his car and placed the PS5 carefully in the backseat. He didn't notice Susan approaching until she was standing just a few feet away. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp but polite enough to mask her intentions. "I couldn't help but notice you just bought that PlayStation. My son has been begging for one, and I've been searching everywhere. Would you be willing to sell it to me? I'll pay you extra." Marcus was caught off guard. He looked at Susan, her expectant smile not quite reaching her eyes, and hesitated before responding. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this is for me. I've been saving up for months to get it." Her smile faltered. "Well, surely you understand how hard it is to find one of these. I'm offering you more than what you paid. Wouldn't that help you out?" There it was, the assumption that money could solve everything. But Marcus shook his head. "I really can't. This means a lot to me." Susan's demeanor shifted. The politeness disappeared, replaced by something colder. "You're being selfish," she snapped. "People like you don't even appreciate things like this. My son deserves it more than you do." Marcus froze, her words cutting deeper than he expected. He wasn't one to let strangers get under his skin, but the way she said, "people like you," made his stomach churn. Still, he kept his cool. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but this isn't up for debate. Have a good night." He turned to walk away, but Susan wasn't done. As he reached his driver's side door, she stepped closer, her voice rising. "I'm not leaving until you give me that PlayStation. You don't deserve it." Marcus's heart pounded. He wasn't sure if he should argue back or just get in his car and leave. Before he could decide, Susan reached out and grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away from the car. Shocked, Marcus yanked his arm back, his voice firm. "Ma'am, don't touch me." The scene was escalating, and a few passers-by began to take notice. Marcus felt the weight of their stares and the whispers that followed. He hated being the center of attention, especially in situations like this. But Susan, unfazed, crossed her arms and huffed. "Fine," she said, pulling out her phone. "If you're going to act like a thug, I'll just call the police and let them deal with you." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. His mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. He hadn't done anything wrong, but the way Susan was spinning the situation made it clear she was trying to paint him as the aggressor. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he pulled out his own phone to record what was happening. And that's where the story takes a turn no one could have predicted. What started as a simple shopping trip was about to become a viral moment, one that would spark outrage, discussions about privilege, and an unexpected twist that neither Marcus nor Susan saw coming. But for now, in that parking lot under the cold glow of the streetlights, all Marcus could do was stand his ground and hope the truth would come to light. Marcus stood frozen, his phone shaking slightly in his hand as he hit the record button. He didn't want to escalate the situation, but he also knew that staying silent could make things worse. His instincts told him to document everything. Susan, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed by the growing tension. She held her phone to her ear, her voice dripping with feigned distress as she began to speak. "Yes, hello, I need the police here immediately," she said loudly, glancing at Marcus with a look of triumph as if she'd already won. "There's a man here threatening me in the parking lot. He's refusing to leave me alone, and I feel very unsafe." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. He opened his mouth to protest but stopped himself, knowing it wouldn't matter. He knew how situations like this could go. His heart pounded as he reminded himself to stay calm. Raising his voice or making sudden movements could turn things against him in an instant. A few people in the parking lot had stopped to watch the unfolding scene, their curious glances adding to the weight of the moment. Some whispered to each other, while others pulled out their phones to record. Marcus couldn't tell if anyone was on his side, but he hoped at least one of them would step up if things got out of hand. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but filled with frustration. He held his phone up, making sure the camera captured both him and Susan. "You're lying to the police, and you know it." Susan turned to him with a smirk, still holding her phone to her ear. "I told you, you don't deserve that PlayStation. Maybe next time, you'll think twice about being so selfish." Marcus's jaw tightened. He wanted to say so much to call her out for what this really was, but he knew he had to choose his words carefully. Susan's tone, her words, the way she carried herself, it all screamed entitlement. And that comment about, "people like you," still echoed in his mind, making his stomach churn. He'd heard it before, in different forms, from different people. It was a coded message, but the meaning was loud and clear. Susan turned her back to Marcus and spoke louder into the phone, describing him in detail. "He's wearing a hoodie and jeans, and he's acting very aggressive. He won't leave me alone, and he's trying to intimidate me." Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He glanced at the growing crowd, searching for an ally. "Everyone here can see what's really happening," he said, addressing the onlookers. "Please, if you're recording this, don't stop. The truth needs to come out." One woman, standing a few feet away, finally stepped forward. She was holding her own phone, clearly recording everything. "I've been watching the whole time," she said, her voice firm. "He hasn't done anything wrong. You're the one causing the problem." Susan whipped around to face the woman, her expression shifting from smug to defensive. "Excuse me? You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," the woman shot back. "You tried to grab his arm. I saw it. And now you're lying to the police?" Susan's face turned red, but before she could respond, the sound of distant sirens filled the air. Marcus's stomach dropped. He knew the police were on their way, and despite being in the right, he couldn't shake the fear of what might happen when they arrived. He'd seen too many stories like this before, stories that didn't end well. He thought of his family, his friends, and all the times his parents had warned him to be extra careful in situations like this. "Stay calm, be respectful, and never give them a reason to see you as a threat," his mother would always say. Her words echoed in his mind as he braced himself for what was coming. The crowd had grown larger now, and more people were recording. Some whispered words of support to Marcus, while others stayed silent, unsure of how to get involved. Susan, however, seemed unfazed by the commotion. She adjusted her coat, straightened her posture, and prepared to present herself as the victim. Moments later, 2 police cars pulled into the parking lot, their lights flashing but sirens silenced. Marcus felt his heart racing as 2 officers stepped out, one man and one woman, both wearing neutral expressions. Susan wasted no time rushing over to them, her voice trembling as she pointed toward Marcus. "Officers, thank God you're here," she began, her tone dripping with false relief. "That man over there has been harassing me. He grabbed me and threatened me when I asked him a simple question. I'm so scared right now." The officers glanced at Marcus, then at the crowd. The female officer stepped forward and held up a hand. "Ma'am, let's take a step back and get all the details." "Sir," she said, addressing Marcus, "can you tell me your side of the story?" Marcus nodded, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside him. I didn't touch her, and I certainly didn't threaten her. She approached me as I was putting my PlayStation in my car. She asked to buy it, and when I said no, she got upset. Then she grabbed my arm, and when I pulled away, she called you. The male officer glanced at Susan. Is that true, ma'am? Did you grab him? Susan gasped, clutching her chest as if the very suggestion was offensive. Of course not. He's lying to cover his tracks. I'm the one who's scared here. At that moment, the woman from the crowd stepped forward again. I saw everything, she said loudly, holding up her phone. She's lying. He didn't do anything wrong. I have it all on video. The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. Ma'am, the female officer said to Susan, we'll need to review the footage. Please wait here. Susan's confident demeanor faltered slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. Fine, go ahead, but I hope you see what kind of person you're dealing with. Marcus let out a shaky breath, grateful for the bystander who had stepped up. But he knew this wasn't over. The officers asked for everyone's footage, including Marcus's, and began reviewing it right there in the parking lot. The tension in the air was thick as everyone waited. Marcus glanced at Susan, who stood with her arms crossed, her expression a mix of defiance and unease. He couldn't help but wonder what had driven her to act this way. Was it entitlement, prejudice, or something else entirely? As the officers reviewed the footage, the female officer's expression shifted slightly, her brow furrowing. She turned to Marcus, then to Susan. Ma'am, based on the evidence we've seen so far, it appears your account of the events doesn't match what actually happened. You'll need to come with us for further questioning. Susan's face turned pale. What? Are you serious? I'm the victim here. Ma'am, the male officer said firmly, please cooperate. We need to resolve this properly. Marcus felt a wave of relief, but it was tempered by exhaustion. The ordeal wasn't over, but for the first time that evening, it felt like the truth was starting to come to light. As Susan reluctantly followed the officers to their car, Marcus turned to the woman who had spoken up for him. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. She smiled. You didn't deserve any of this. I just did what anyone should do. Marcus nodded, but deep down, he knew not everyone would have stepped up like she did. And as he finally climbed into his car, the PlayStation still safely in the backseat, he couldn't help but wonder how different the night might have been if no one had been there to witness the truth. As Marcus sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, the weight of what had just happened hit him all at once. His mind was spinning, replaying the events over and over. The relief he'd felt when the officers seemed to take his side was fleeting. He knew how easily things could have gone differently. Even now, with Susan taken for questioning, he wasn't entirely sure she wouldn't try to twist the story further. People like her always found ways to escape accountability. The parking lot was slowly returning to normal. Some bystanders had dispersed, while a few still lingered, talking in hushed voices and scrolling through their phones, likely uploading their videos. Marcus could already feel the buzz of his phone in his pocket, notifications piling up from people sharing clips of the encounter online. He wasn't sure how to feel about it. On one hand, the recordings were his safety net, proof that he hadn't done anything wrong. But on the other hand, he didn't want his life to become some viral spectacle. He sighed deeply and started the car. All he wanted was to go home, set up his new PlayStation, and forget this ever happened. But even as he pulled out of the parking lot, he couldn't shake the tension in his chest. This wasn't just about a PS5. It was about something bigger, something that had followed him his whole life but reared its head in the most unexpected ways. As he drove through the city streets, his phone buzzed again, this time with a call from his best friend, Jamal. Marcus hesitated for a moment before answering. Yo, what's up? Marcus said, trying to sound normal, though his voice still carried the weight of what had just happened. Man, I just saw a video of you online. Are you okay? Jamal's voice was filled with concern. Marcus gripped the wheel tighter. Yeah, I'm fine. It was just crazy, you know? This lady tried to take my PS5 and then called the cops on me like I was the one doing something wrong. That's wild, Jamal said, his tone growing angrier. People like her always think they can get away with stuff like that. But it looks like people were on your side, at least. Yeah, a few folks stood up for me. That's the only reason I'm not sitting in the back of a squad car right now, Marcus admitted. But still, it's just exhausting, man. You think you're just living your life, and then something like this happens. Jamal sighed on the other end. I feel you. It's like no matter what we do, people are always looking for a reason to paint us as the bad guys. You did the right thing, though, recording everything. That's how you protect yourself these days. I guess, Marcus said, though the pit in his stomach remained. I just want to forget about it. I didn't ask for any of this. After a few more minutes of talking, Marcus hung up and turned into his apartment complex. The lot was quiet, save for a few neighbors walking their dogs or unloading groceries. He parked and carefully grabbed the PS5 box from the backseat, scanning his surroundings out of habit. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even though he knew Susan was no longer anywhere near him. Inside his apartment, the familiar comfort of home began to soothe his nerves. He placed the PS5 on the coffee table and sat on the couch, staring at it for a moment. This should have been a celebratory moment, a reward for months of hard work and saving. But instead, it felt tainted. Marcus decided to distract himself by scrolling through his phone. Sure enough, his name was already trending on social media. Dozens of videos of the incident were circulating, with captions like asterisk, Karen tries to steal PS5, calls cops when denied, asterisk and asterisk, racist encounter caught on camera. People were flooding the comments, some expressing outrage at Susan's behavior, others commending Marcus for staying calm. But not all the comments were supportive. Mixed in with the positive messages were trolls and skeptics, accusing Marcus of overreacting or twisting the story for attention. Some even sided with Susan, claiming she had every right to call the police if she felt threatened. The more Marcus read, the more his frustration grew. It didn't matter how much evidence there were always going to be people who refused to see the truth. He put his phone down, feeling a headache coming on. Meanwhile, across town, Susan sat in a small, cold room at the police station. Her polished demeanor had begun to crack. She fiddled nervously with the strap of her designer handbag, replaying the incident in her mind. She didn't understand how things had spiraled so quickly out of her control. All she wanted was that PlayStation for her son. It wasn't supposed to turn into this public mess. The officers had reviewed the footage and were asking her pointed questions. "Ma'am, do you understand the seriousness of filing a false police report?" one of them asked, his tone firm but professional. Susan stammered, her confidence evaporating. I wasn't trying to lie. I really thought he was going to hurt me." He looked aggressive. The officer raised an eyebrow. "The video shows no aggression on his part. In fact, it shows you reaching for him. Can you explain that?" Susan faltered. I panicked. I don't know. Maybe I misread the situation." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "We'll need to document your statement, but let me be clear, this kind of behavior can have serious consequences. You can't weaponize law enforcement because you didn't get your way." Susan nodded, her face burning with shame, but inside, her mind was racing. She couldn't let this ruin her reputation. She had friends in high places, connections that could help smooth things over. She just needed to be careful about her next move. Back at his apartment, Marcus tried to focus on setting up his PlayStation, but the events of the evening kept replaying in his head. He wondered if this was really over or if Susan would try to find a way to twist the narrative even further. He couldn't help but think about the woman who had stepped up for him in the parking lot. Her actions had made all the difference, and yet, he also knew she didn't have to get involved. This wasn't the first time Marcus had faced situations like this, though usually they were more subtle: a suspicious glance in a store, someone clutching their bag tighter when he walked by. But this was something else entirely. As the night wore on, Marcus received a text from an unknown number. It was a link to an article, the headline reading, "Viral video sparks debate on racial bias and entitlement." His story was out there now, no longer just his own. It was being dissected, analyzed, and debated by strangers. And while part of him hoped it would lead to accountability for Susan, another part of him dreaded what might come next. Because if there was one thing Marcus had learned in his 22 years, it was that justice wasn't always guaranteed. And sometimes, the fight was just beginning. Marcus woke up the next morning to a flood of notifications. His phone buzzed relentlessly, the screen lighting up with messages, tags, and news alerts. Groggily, he reached for it, but as the notifications loaded, he froze. His face was everywhere. The incident had gone fully viral overnight, and his name was now tied to countless posts, tweets, and video clips. There were people from all over the world commenting on what had happened. Many were supportive, calling him a hero for staying calm and standing his ground. Others were outraged at Susan, labeling her a symbol of entitlement and racial bias. But not all the messages were positive. Some were hostile, even threatening. Trolls accused him of staging the whole thing, while others warned him to watch his back. The sheer volume of attention was overwhelming, and it only added to his unease. He hadn't asked for any of this. As Marcus scrolled through the chaos, a particular video caught his attention. It was an interview with Susan, recorded outside her lawyer's office late the previous night. She looked disheveled but determined, her voice trembling as she spoke to reporters. "I made a mistake," she said, carefully choosing her words. "I misinterpreted the situation, and I deeply regret the events that unfolded. But I've been receiving threats and harassment, and it's gotten out of control. I never intended for this to happen." Marcus stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Her apology felt hollow, more like damage control than genuine remorse. And her attempt to paint herself as a victim only fueled his frustration. She wasn't the one who'd faced the threat of being falsely arrested. She wasn't the one whose life had been upended. His phone buzzed again, this time with a call from his sister, Jasmine. Marcus hesitated before answering. He loved his sister, but she had a way of speaking her mind that often left him feeling more agitated than reassured. "Marcus," she said as soon as he picked up, "what the hell is going on?" "I just saw the news." "Yeah, it's a lot," he admitted, rubbing his temples. "A lot? Marcus, this is huge. Everyone's talking about it. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Her tone softened, concern creeping in. "I'm fine," he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. "It's just overwhelming. I didn't think it would blow up like this." "Well, of course it did," Jasmine said. "This isn't just about you. It's about everything people are tired of dealing with. You're just the face of it now. Whether you like it or not, people are looking to you to speak up." Marcus sighed. "I didn't ask to be anyone's spokesperson. I just wanted to buy a PlayStation, and now my whole life is out there." "I know," Jasmine said gently. "But you can't ignore it. People are rallying behind you because they see themselves in what happened. You have a chance to make a difference." Marcus wasn't sure how to respond. He didn't feel like a symbol or a hero. He was just a guy who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Jasmine's words stuck with him, even as he ended the call and tried to go about his day. By the afternoon, things had escalated even further. News outlets were now dissecting the incident, bringing in experts to discuss racial bias, entitlement, and the misuse of emergency services. Marcus's face was splashed across headlines, while Susan's name became a trending topic. It was surreal to see his life reduced to sound bites and hashtags. Then came the email. It was from a well-known civil rights lawyer who had seen the footage and wanted to help. The lawyer offered to represent Marcus, not just to ensure he was protected, but to pursue legal action against Susan if he wanted to. Marcus read the email several times, his emotions conflicting. Part of him wanted to move on and put the whole thing behind him. But another part of him, the part that remembered the fear and humiliation he'd felt, knew this wasn't just about him. If he didn't take a stand, what was to stop Susan or anyone like her from doing this again to someone else? Meanwhile, Susan was facing her own storm. Her attempt to shift the narrative had only added fuel to the fire. Videos of her interview were being dissected online, with people pointing out her lack of accountability. Old tweets and social media posts of hers began to surface, painting an even darker picture of her character. The backlash was relentless, and her lawyer advised her to stay out of the public eye. But Susan wasn't the type to back down easily. She began reaching out to her connections, trying to salvage her reputation. She contacted reporters, friends, and even tried to get in touch with Marcus, hoping to broker some sort of truce. She claimed she wanted to apologize directly, but Marcus wasn't interested in hearing from her. To him, her actions had spoken louder than any apology ever could. The tension reached a boiling point that evening when Marcus received a knock on his door. His heart raced as he looked through the peephole, half expecting it to be the police or some reporter trying to get a comment. But it was the woman from the parking lot, the one who had stood up for him. "Hey," she said when he opened the door. "I'm sorry to just show up like this, but I wanted to check on you. I saw your address in one of the videos and I just wanted to make sure you're okay." Marcus was taken aback by her kindness. "Thanks. "I'm managing," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "I never got your name, by the way." "It's Lisa," she said with a small smile. "I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. I know it's not much, but I thought maybe I could help somehow." They talked for hours, sharing their thoughts on everything that had happened. Lisa revealed that she had faced her own share of bias and injustice, which was why she felt compelled to speak up that night. Her words gave Marcus a sense of comfort he hadn't realized he needed. For the first time since the incident, he felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. But as the night wore on, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from over. The attention, the debates, the looming decision about whether to take legal action. It all felt like a ticking clock, counting down to something bigger. And deep down, he knew the hardest part was yet to come. As Marcus and Lisa talked into the night, there was a sense of solidarity between them, but it was clear neither of them had expected the fallout from the incident to grow so enormous. Marcus felt lighter having someone to talk to who truly understood, but just as he was beginning to feel a small measure of peace, his phone buzzed with another notification. This one wasn't like the others. It wasn't a message from a friend or a news alert. It was an email from an anonymous sender with the subject line, "Be careful." Marcus hesitated before opening it, a chill running down his spine. Inside was a single sentence. "You don't know who you're messing with." Attached to the email was a grainy photo of him taken that very night, sitting by his window, talking to Lisa. His heart pounded as he showed the message to her. Lisa's face darkened. "This isn't just random hate," she said firmly. "Someone is trying to intimidate you. They're watching you, Marcus. This is serious." Marcus felt a wave of nausea as he locked his door and pulled the curtains shut. It wasn't just online trolls anymore, this felt personal. The thought that someone had been lurking near his apartment without his knowledge was deeply unsettling. He tried to brush it off, telling himself it was probably just someone trying to scare him, but the knot in his stomach wouldn't go away. The next morning, Marcus awoke to another twist he hadn't seen coming. His lawyer called, his tone urgent. "Marcus, I need you to sit down for this," he began. "Susan's legal team just filed a counterclaim against you." Marcus blinked, unable to process the words. "What? For what?" "They're claiming defamation and emotional distress," the lawyer explained. "They're arguing that the public backlash against her has been so severe that it's affected her career and personal life, and they're blaming you for it." Marcus felt his stomach drop. It didn't make sense. How can they blame me for something she started? She's the one who tried to take my stuff. She's the one who called the cops. It's a desperate move, the lawyer reassured him. But it's also a calculated one. They're trying to shift the narrative, make her look like the victim. "We'll fight it, but it's going to get messy." Messy wasn't the word Marcus wanted to hear. He already felt like he was walking on eggshells, trying to navigate the attention and the threats. Now, he had to worry about a legal battle too? It felt like Susan was determined to drag him down with her, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Susan's lawyer had arranged another interview for her, this time with a sympathetic news outlet. In the interview, Susan painted herself as a misunderstood mother who had simply acted out of fear. She tearfully described how the incident had ruined her reputation, claiming she'd received threats and lost clients. But what stood out most was when she hinted at receiving new evidence that could change everything. Marcus saw the interview later that day, and his stomach churned. What evidence could she possibly have? He hadn't done anything wrong, but the vague insinuation left him feeling paranoid. Lisa called him shortly after the interview aired, her voice tense. "She's bluffing," Lisa said, trying to reassure him. "There's no way she has anything real. Everyone saw what happened." Marcus wanted to believe that, but something about the way Susan had spoken made him uneasy. It wasn't just her words, it was her confidence. She truly believed she could turn this around, and that scared him. As the days went on, the tension only grew. Marcus began noticing unfamiliar cars parked near his apartment. His phone rang with unknown numbers more often, and when he answered, there was either silence on the other end or a robotic voice saying cryptic phrases like, "You're going to regret this." It was clear that someone, or multiple people, were trying to shake him. One evening, as Marcus was walking back from the corner store, he noticed someone following him. He quickened his pace, gripping his bag tightly, but the figure stayed just far enough behind to avoid confrontation. When Marcus finally reached his building and turned to confront them, the person was gone. It left him rattled and on edge, wondering who could be behind all of this. Lisa urged him to go to the police, but Marcus hesitated. "What am I supposed to tell them?" he asked. "That I'm getting weird emails and someone's following me? They're not going to take it seriously." "Maybe not," Lisa said. "But at least it'll be on record. You need to protect yourself, Marcus. This is bigger than just some online drama now." Reluctantly, Marcus filed a report, though he wasn't sure it would do much good. The officers were polite but non-committal, taking down his statement and telling him to call if anything escalated. It wasn't the reassurance he was hoping for. As Marcus tried to focus on the looming legal battle, the second twist hit him like a freight train. His lawyer called again, this time with news that Susan's team had subpoenaed footage from the store's security cameras. They were claiming that the new angle would show a different side to the story, one that might implicate Marcus. Marcus was furious. "I didn't do anything wrong," he insisted. "How can they twist this?" "We'll see what's on the footage," his lawyer said. "But Marcus, you need to be prepared for anything. They're playing dirty." The thought of being dragged through the mud again left Marcus feeling helpless. He wasn't just fighting for his name anymore, he was fighting to protect his future. Every step Susan took seemed designed to push him closer to the edge, and he wasn't sure how much more he could take. As the tension mounted, Marcus received another anonymous email late one night. This one contained a video file. Hesitant but curious, he opened it, and his heart nearly stopped. It was grainy footage from the parking lot, taken from an angle he hadn't seen before. But this wasn't from the store's cameras, this was from someone's phone. And what it showed made his blood run cold. In the video, a man in a dark hoodie appeared to be slipping something into Marcus's car, glancing around nervously before walking away. The timestamp was from the night of the incident. Marcus stared at the screen, his mind racing. Who was this man? What had he left in his car? And why was this video being sent to him now? Marcus felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just about Susan anymore. Someone else was involved, and they were playing a dangerous game. The stakes had never been higher, and Marcus knew he was running out of time to figure out the truth before it was too late. Marcus stared at the grainy video on his screen, his mind racing. The man in the dark hoodie seemed deliberate, his movements calculated, as he placed something inside Marcus's car. It didn't make sense. Who was he? And what could he have left behind? The timestamp sent a chill down Marcus's spine. It was the same night of the confrontation with Susan. The pieces of the puzzle weren't adding up, and the more he tried to connect them, the more tangled the web became. Lisa, who had stayed over to support Marcus through the chaos, leaned over his shoulder, her face etched with concern. "This changes everything," she said softly. "You need to show this to your lawyer. Whoever sent this is trying to tell you something, but it also means they know more than we do." The next morning, Marcus and Lisa met with his lawyer, who carefully examined the video. "This could either be a break for us or another layer of trouble," the lawyer said grimly. "If that man planted something incriminating in your car, Susan's team might try to use it to shift the blame onto you." "But why would someone do that?" Marcus asked, frustration seeping into his voice. "I haven't done anything." The lawyer hesitated before responding. "This might not be about you personally, Marcus. This could be someone trying to manipulate the situation for their own gain. It's not uncommon in high-profile cases like this for people to escalate things to create chaos." Later that day, Marcus decided to inspect his car himself. With Lisa by his side, he cautiously searched every corner, every compartment, desperate to find whatever it was the man had planted. For a while, it seemed hopeless. Nothing seemed out of place. Then, tucked beneath the driver's seat, he found a small, unmarked envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a USB drive and a single slip of paper with the words, "The truth is in here." Marcus felt a mix of dread and determination as he plugged the USB drive into his laptop back at his apartment. The drive contained several files, but one stood out, a video labeled simply, "Parking Lot Truth.mp4." When he clicked on it, his screen filled with footage from the night of the confrontation. This time, it wasn't from the perspective of a witness or security camera. It was as if someone had been filming from the shadows, capturing not just Marcus and Susan but the moments before and after their argument. The video revealed a side of the story no one had seen. Before Marcus had even arrived at the parking lot, Susan could be seen pacing near the PlayStation display. She seemed agitated, constantly looking over her shoulder. Then, a man in a dark hoodie, the same man from the earlier video, approached her. They spoke in hushed tones, and though the audio was muffled, a few words could be made out. Asterisk, we'll handle it, just make sure you stick to the story. Susan nodded, glancing nervously around as the man walked away. Marcus and Lisa exchanged stunned looks as they watched the footage. She planned this, Lisa whispered, her voice trembling with anger. She wasn't just acting out of entitlement. This was a setup from the start. The rest of the video captured the confrontation as everyone had already seen it, but what followed was even more damning. After Marcus walked away, clearly frustrated but calm, Susan was seen pulling out her phone and making the 911 call. Her tone was panicked, her voice laced with false fear, as she described Marcus as aggressive and threatening. It was clear she was fabricating the story to escalate the situation. The final clip was perhaps the most chilling. The man in the hoodie reappeared after the police arrived. He lingered near the edge of the lot, watching intently, before slipping away unnoticed. It was as if he was there to ensure everything went according to plan. Marcus's mind raced. But why? Why would someone go to these lengths? What did they have to gain from this? Lisa shook her head. Maybe it's bigger than just Susan. Maybe she's just a pawn in someone else's game. The lawyer, after reviewing the footage, agreed that this was the turning point they needed. With the new evidence, they could prove that Susan had orchestrated the incident, likely with the help of the mysterious man. It was enough to not only dismiss her counterclaim but to potentially bring charges against her for filing a false police report and conspiring to harm Marcus's reputation. But just as Marcus began to feel a glimmer of hope, a final twist shattered any sense of relief. That evening, as the story continued to dominate headlines, Marcus received another anonymous email. This time, there was no cryptic message, just a single file attachment. When he opened it, his screen filled with a series of photos. Each one showed Marcus in various places: at the grocery store, walking to his apartment, sitting by his window. The timestamps ranged from weeks before the incident to just days ago. Lisa gasped as she looked over his shoulder. Marcus, someone's been following you for a long time. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about the PlayStation or Susan's lies. This was something deeper, something more sinister. As he stared at the photos, one detail stood out: a shadowy figure in the background of several images. The man in the hoodie. Marcus felt his chest tighten. This wasn't over. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to discredit him. They were watching, waiting, and pulling the strings from the shadows. And as much as he wanted to believe he was finally close to the truth, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had only just begun. The weight of everything pressed down on Marcus as he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the photos on his laptop. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was exhaustion. The relentless scrutiny, the threats, the strange twists, it felt endless. Lisa sat across from him, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "You're not alone in this," she said firmly. "We've come this far, and we're going to see it through. Whoever this is, they're trying to break you, but you've already shown how strong you are." The next morning, Marcus handed over the photos and all the videos to his lawyer, who immediately involved the authorities. The mysterious man in the hoodie had left a trail, albeit a faint one. The USB drive, combined with the video evidence and the photos, gave investigators enough to work with. For the first time, Marcus felt like the tide might be turning in his favor. Days later, Marcus received a call from the detective assigned to his case. They had identified the man in the hoodie. His name was Greg Lewis, a local contractor with no clear ties to Marcus but a suspicious connection to Susan. As it turned out, Greg had done some work for Susan's family in the past, and his phone records revealed multiple calls between them leading up to the incident. When confronted by the police, Greg cracked under pressure. He admitted to being involved in Susan's plan, though he claimed he didn't know the full extent of her intentions. Susan had reportedly reached out to him, saying she needed help teaching someone a lesson. She had promised him money to stage the situation in the parking lot, ensuring she'd come out looking like the victim. Greg's job had been to create enough confusion and plant items in Marcus's car that could be used to paint him in a negative light if the story ever went public. The revelation was staggering. Susan's actions weren't just impulsive or emotional, they were calculated. The level of planning she'd put into trying to frame Marcus went far beyond what anyone had imagined. With Greg's confession and the mounting evidence against her, Susan was arrested and charged with filing a false police report, conspiracy, and defamation. The legal battle that Marcus had feared would drag on for months suddenly shifted in his favor. But while justice was being served in court, Marcus still had to grapple with the personal toll the ordeal had taken on him. The constant vigilance, the online threats, and the fear of being followed had left scars that wouldn't heal overnight. He started therapy to process everything he'd been through and leaned heavily on Lisa, who had become an unwavering source of support. As the legal proceedings continued, the public's perception of Marcus began to change. News outlets that had initially focused on the sensational aspects of the story started reporting on the truth. People who had doubted him or jumped to conclusions reached out to apologize, and support poured in from those who admired his resilience in the face of such a calculated attack. One evening, Marcus sat down to record a video for his followers. He wanted to address everything that had happened, not just the incident with Susan, but the larger issues it represented. In the video, he spoke candidly about the pain of being falsely accused and the struggle to maintain his dignity in the face of overwhelming odds. He also touched on the importance of standing up for oneself and not letting fear or intimidation silence the truth. "I never asked for any of this," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "I just wanted to buy a PlayStation and go home. But this situation became so much bigger than that. It became a fight for my name, my future, and my peace of mind. And while I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, I've learned how important it is to stay true to who you are, even when the world seems determined to tear you down." The video went viral, resonating with people who had faced similar struggles. Marcus's honesty and vulnerability struck a chord, and it became clear that his story wasn't just about one incident. It was about resilience, integrity, and the courage to fight for the truth. As weeks turned into months, life slowly began to return to normal for Marcus. The court ruled in his favor, dismissing Susan's counterclaim and ordering her to pay damages for the harm she had caused. Greg, meanwhile, received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation, though Marcus found little solace in that. For him, the victory wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming his life and moving forward. Lisa remained a constant presence, their bond deepening through everything they had endured together. One evening, as they sat on the couch playing the very PlayStation 5 that had sparked the entire ordeal, Marcus turned to her and smiled. "You know," he said, "if someone had told me 6 months ago that a gaming console would change my life, I would have laughed in their face." Lisa laughed too, but then she grew serious. "It's not the console that changed your life, Marcus. It's you. You stood up for yourself when it would have been easier to back down. You didn't let them win." Marcus nodded, her words sinking in. She was right. The PlayStation was just the spark. The real story was about the fire he'd found within himself to keep going, no matter how hard things got. As the credits rolled on their game, Marcus felt a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible. The ordeal was over, and while it had left its mark, it had also taught him invaluable lessons about strength, trust, and the power of truth. The next day, Marcus posted one final update on his story. In it, he thanked everyone who had supported him and shared a message of hope for anyone facing their own battles. "The world can be harsh, and people can be cruel," he wrote. "But no matter how dark things seem, there's always light if you keep looking for it. Don't let anyone dim that light. It's yours, and you deserve to shine." As he hit post, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The chapter was finally closed, and for the first time in months, he felt free to look ahead. Life wasn't perfect, but it was his again, and that was enough.